And I'd like for you to take a trip with me this morning. Some of you have never traveled with me. This is your chance to travel. Okay? Some of you haven't, you're scared to death by now. So, anyway, we're going to take a trip. We're going to take a trip 125 years ago. 125 years ago to the town site of Holly, Oklahoma Territory. You find yourself back there? Holly, Oklahoma Territory, 1895, January. It's cold outside. Light dusting snow fell on the ground over the weekend, and it's Sunday morning. And before the sun ever comes up, you wake up hoping that somebody else in the household will jump up and go start the fire in the old wood stove so that it'll take the chill off the house before you have to get up. But no one does. So eventually you jump out of bed, run across the hardwood floor, get over there by the old wood stove, throw in a couple of twigs and get started and get the fire going. Then you run back to your bed and you start putting on your clothes because you know the day is getting started. The first thing you have to do is you need to go visit the outhouse. And there's no stove out there. There's no heat at all in that old outhouse. And so you run outside, you get to the outhouse, and then after you get through the outhouse, you come back by the hen house and you pick up some eggs for breakfast, hoping that somebody's in there with a skillet ready to cook those eggs. You get inside and you hand the eggs off, and then immediately you go back outside because you have to go out to the barn and milk old Bessie. So you'll have some fresh milk for breakfast, and that she won't be so cantankerous the rest of the day. You also have to do some other chores outside. You need to bring in a few more pieces of wood to keep the house warm. After you get breakfast eaten, there's other chores to do, so you head outside to do those chores. About the time the sun's coming up, you'll be able to look around and see what's going on around you. As you finish up your chores, you go back into the house. Then, within just a short period of time, it's time to go out and get the wagon and hook up the horses because it's time to go to church. You get them harnessed up, you get the wagon pulled up to the front door of the house. You go inside and you strip the quilts off of the beds so that the kids can be wrapped up in something warm on their way to church. You might even have a couple of hot bricks on the old cook stove that have warmed up. You'll put those down on the floor of the wagon so that their feet won't stay so cold. You get all that taken care of, and then you carry the kids out, put them in the wagon, and you head out to church. And all the way to church, you're praying, Lord, I hope someone else got there first and started the fire. Sure enough, when you get there, you walk in, and the old potbelly stove is starting to get hot. Somebody else has started that. You greet one another, and you get ready for worship. There's no nursery. There's no Sunday school class because it's a one-room house. It's a one-room schoolhouse, is what it is. And you have desks in there. You sit around the desk. There's no hymnal. There's no piano. There's no organ. There's no padded pews. But you still have church. In spite of the crying kids and the misbehaving kids, you have church. And the preacher comes from quite a ways away. He comes from all the way over from Alvarado. He comes once a month, and you're sure glad he comes once a month because that's the one Sunday you don't have to listen to your neighbor talk about everything. So he shows up and he preaches. And he preaches. And he preaches because there's no clock there in the church. And even if there were, he wouldn't pay attention to it any more than we do today. And he keeps preaching, and finally, church is over with. You load all the kids back up in the wagon, and you head back home. Glad you had a chance to worship. Glad you had a chance to worship. Now, let's come back home. had so many things for granted. And yet 125 years ago, a group of people came to this community, came to this area of Oklahoma, and one of the first things they wanted to do was start a church. Start a church. And they wanted to start a Baptist church. A Baptist church. By the way, I didn't mention the salary of the preacher. He came once a month and he got $125 per year. Per year. Later on, they raised it to $140 a year. He'd come once a month. Listen to some of the names of those people who started this church. Bridgman, Goble, LaForce, Van Hughes, Potter, Moore, Johnson, Ware, Armstrong. And the preacher's name was J.H. Warren. J.H. Warren. What do you think they would think of us today? First of all, would they have ever imagined that this church would still be flourishing 125 years after that first worship service? A lot of those people moved away. They went someplace else. So they weren't here later on when the church was still going on. What do you think they would think about us today? Do you think they were excited about our anniversary service? Now we're beginning a new 125 years. A new 125 years. Now I don't have a sign-in book like we did last Sunday. We'll just count that as last Sunday, the sign-in book. But what do you think the people 125 years from now will think about us? Will think about us? If the Lord doesn't return, and I believe He will, but if He doesn't, will this church be here 125 years today? And that is really up to us. Now, no, I'm not talking about the next generation. I'm talking about us, you. Will it be here 125 years from now? It will be up to us. Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. I want us to read this passage. We're familiar with it. We know all about it, but I want to apply it to us today. Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. Therefore, now whenever you see a therefore, you need to ask why it's there for. Okay? So the reason there's a therefore there is because the writer of Hebrews is referring back to chapter 11. And all of us know that chapter 11 is the great heroes of the faith. It talks about Moses, it talks about Abraham, it talks about Isaac and Jacob, it talks about Noah, it talks about David, it talks about Daniel, it talks about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It talks about all the great heroes of the faith of the Old Testament. And so he's starting out with those people who have faithfully served God hundreds of years before he ever wrote this. Thousands of years before he ever wrote this. And he says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down on the right hand of the throne of God. I'd like for us to think about this passage today. The first thing we see is since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses. Now, personally, I don't think that Hebrews chapter 11 has been completed. I personally think that God is still adding to that chapter in heaven, in eternity. And I think he looks down at Bethel Holly Baptist Church, and maybe some of those people that I read their names of has been added to that list. There are some of the people that taught Sunday school class and played the piano and the organ here in our church, and taught Vacation Bible School, and handed out books, and encouraged and prayed, have been added to that chapter. The people who led us to Jesus, the people who encouraged us when we were depressed, who comforted us when we were in sorrow, those people who filled in for us when we could not be here, those people have been added to the chapter 11 of this text. And if that's the case, the people that started this church 125 years ago is included in that great cloud of witnesses. They're watching us today. Watching us today. I remember years ago, we were up opening a grave up at the Holly Cemetery, and I told the guys around me, I said, you know, when I die, I'm going to be buried on the very south end on that hill there at the cemetery. And somebody asked, well, Gary, why would you want to be buried there away from everybody else? I said, that way I can see who comes to church on Sunday. Then someone said, you may be able to see who comes to church on Sunday, but you won't be able to see whether I'm awake or not. So I changed my mind. I decided I want you to bury me underneath the pulpit so that I can watch you inside. Now, I won't have to do that, because if Hebrews chapter 12 is correct, I'm going to be watching from heaven. And those people 125 years ago were very much part of our celebration last Sunday. They were having a great reunion in heaven of everyone who's come through Bethel Holly Baptist Church, everyone who's been touched by Bethel Holly Baptist Church, everyone who's been ministered to by Bethel Holly Baptist Church. They're all witnessing, they're all sharing, they're all celebrating with us our 125 years of doing God's will. They're our witnesses. They're watching us. Men and women who faithfully serve Jesus and help support his local church, set an example for us to follow, who taught those classes and worked with those kids in Vacation Bible School. And by the way, you know, Mike Herschel mentioned last week, we used to have 2 weeks of Vacation Bible School. 2 weeks, not 5 days, 2 weeks of Vacation Bible School. Do I hear a motion? We do not do that again. You know, and they did that faithfully. And they did that without all the conveniences that we have today. I mean, I know back then there was no air conditioning in this church. There were a few window air conditioners in the old sanctuary, but those wouldn't keep the coolness in the church. And there was no air conditioning in the educational building at all. And they held 2 weeks of Vacation Bible School. There's that Sunday school teacher, that Vacation Bible School worker, that youth worker, that camp sponsor, that person who made an impact upon your life. And over the last 125 years, there have been people in our church that have been impacting other people. They are our great cloud of witnesses. Our great cloud of witnesses. They see what we do and what we are currently doing. In fact, they're not only just witnesses, they're our teammates. Paul likes to write about the Olympics. He likes to write about sporting events. And here he's writing about the fact that we are in a race. We're in a race. Let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. You say, well, I'm not very fast. That doesn't mean you're not in a race. There are people who are sitting on the sideline. It doesn't mean they're not in the race. There are people who might be going backwards. That doesn't mean they're not in the race. Paul said we're in a race. We are in a race, and these people who have gone before us are our teammates. I like to think of it as a relay. You know what a relay is. There's 4 people out there, and they're going to run a distance, and they have a baton, and they're going to pass the baton off to the next runner, and they're going to run a distance. And they're going to pass the baton off to a third person. They're going to run a distance. And then they're going to hand it off to the last person. And that person has to carry it across the finish line. And it doesn't matter if you are ahead at the end of the first leg. It doesn't matter if you're ahead at the end of the second leg. It doesn't matter if you're ahead at the end of the third leg. What matters is where do you come in at the last leg. And the people who've gone before us, those people who started this church, passed that baton on to the next generation. And the people after them passed it on to another generation. And another group passed the baton on to another generation. And finally, it's in our hands. We could be the last leg. If Jesus chose to come back tomorrow, we're the last leg. If Jesus chose to come back next year, we're the last leg. If Jesus chose to come back 5 years from now, we're the last leg. The baton is in our hands. We're in the race. We're in the race. Last Sunday, Cornerstone sang a song. I'd like to repeat the words. Because a lot of times when you're listening to a song, you're enjoying the song so much, you really don't pay attention to what it says. We're pilgrims on the journey of the narrow road, and those who've gone before us line the way, cheering on the faithful, encouraging the weary, their lives a stirring testimony of God's sustaining grace. Surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us run the race not only for the prize, but as those who've gone before us, let us leave to those behind us the heritage of faithfulness passed on through godly lives. After all our hopes and dreams have come and gone, and our children sift through all we've left behind, may the clues that they discover and the memories they uncover become the light that leads them to the road we each must follow. Oh, may all who come behind us find us faithful. May the fire of our devotion light their way. May the footprints that we leave lead them to believe, and the lives that we live inspire them today. Oh, may all who come behind us find us faithful. The baton is in your hand. It may have been passed on to you from your parent or your grandparent. May have been passed on to you from some godly teacher or youth worker. May have been passed on to you from somebody that's a close friend of yours. But the baton is in your hand. Now we're in the race. Run it to win. Pass it on. Pass it on. Because we want to be found faithful. So how do we run the race? Well, he gives us a couple of ideas here in this text. He said, first of all, let us throw off everything that hinders. Then he says, secondly, let us get rid of the sin in our life. Did you notice it's not the same thing? It's not the same thing. He's not repeating himself. He's not being redundant. You see, there are a lot of things that can hinder us in our Christian life that are not necessarily sinful. In fact, there are things that can hinder us in our Christian life that are good if kept in their proper perspective. But he says, let us throw off all those things that hinder us. In other words, let us run without reservation. Let us not slow ourselves down by anything. Sometimes our job, sometimes our obligation, sometimes our family, sometimes our entertainment wants to slow us down and keep us from being faithful. Don't let that happen. We need to run. We need to be committed so that the next generation will find us faithful, so the next generation will say, I want to be just like that person. I want to be faithful to God and be a part of the church that will go on until another 125 years passes or until the Lord returns. I want to be known. Someday, 125 years from now, some preacher is going to stand in the pulpit and he's going to read off the names of the people of our day. Will your name be there as one of the faithful ones who serve God? Throw away the things that hinder us, slow us down. They keep us from being faithful. They're not necessarily bad. Some of them can be good, but God comes first. throw away the things that hinder us, but the sin that entangles us. Sin that entangles us. Kyle was qualified to run in the state track meet in the hurdles back when he was a senior in high school. And it was my job. Mom always got to watch the race, okay? I got to watch the camera. So here I'm up with the video camera, and the gun sounds, and I'm watching Kyle. I've got him in the screen, and then all of a sudden there are people in front of me. They block it, and so I keep moving my camera around. And when I think he should be there, he wasn't there. And I kept looking. Maybe he got ahead of me, and I looked ahead. I couldn't find him. And then I took the camera down and looked, and Kyle had tripped over one of the hurdles. He didn't finish the race. Now that broke Annette's heart, broke my heart, broke Kyle's heart. But the reality is, he had a chance. Something tripped him up. There are a lot of things that trip us up in life. Most of them are called sin. Sin. Things that will keep us from being faithful to God. Things that will keep us from really serving God. Keep us from being on that list of the great heroes of the faith of our day. And Paul says, let's get rid of them. Let's get rid of them. You say, Brother Gary, I've already done it. No. You don't understand. God's grace is so sufficient. You can start over today. You can start a brand new race today. What you did yesterday, what you did last year, what you did 10 years ago doesn't affect our starting today. So let's get rid of the sin and let's move ahead. And then he says, not only do we get rid of the sin, but let us run with perseverance. Perseverance. Now, some of y'all used to run long distances. I enjoyed running long distances. I was never really good at it, but I enjoyed doing it. One of my fun things to do as a kid growing up was I'd go out and chase jackrabbits. I never caught one, but I sure wore them down. I just liked running. I just enjoyed running. I'd go out and run for miles, just keep running. Now, not speed demon, by the way. I mean, I'm not saying that, but I just keep running. Didn't bother me to run. You keep it up day after day after day after day. You keep it up. And if you're in one of the cross-country races, you know that the first person out of that starting line isn't necessarily the first person that crosses the finish line. Because it's not a matter of how fast you go to begin with, it's how steady you go through the whole race. And the writer here says, hey, I want you to be in the race, and I want you to be persistent in the race. We all remember the story of the turtle and the rabbit. Which one won? God wants us to be on the winning team. The winning team. So somebody said one time, I'd rather burn out than rust out. And I don't think either one biblical. I think God wants us to be consistent in our Christian life. Consistent. Keep going on. Keep moving. I told the story one time of a daughter who was very concerned about her mother. Her mother was 80, and she was going out on a date. For the very first time, this 90-year-old man had invited her out. And the 60-year-old daughter was just really concerned. Just really, really concerned. And so she said, you take your cell phone with you, and if anything happens, you call me. And so the night came for the date, and the mom was picked up by the 90-year-old man, and they went out to eat. And so the daughter gave them enough time to eat, and then started calling, and no one answered the phone. She called at 9 o'clock, no answer. She called at 10 o'clock, no answer. She called at 11 o'clock, there was no answer. Finally, at 11:30, she finally picks up the phone, and the daughter says, Mom, where have you been? She said, I was out on a date. Well, how did it go? It was terrible. What do you mean it was terrible? Well, I had to slap him 3 times. You're kidding me. A 90-year-old man was getting fresh with you? She says, oh no, I had to slap him 3 times to make sure he was still breathing. And I wonder sometimes if God doesn't need to come down and slap us and say, wake up, get busy, be faithful, be in service, do something for me. You know why? Because Jesus, for the joy set before him, endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down on the right hand of the throne of God. Why do we do our best in our race? Why do we stay faithful to him and his church? Because Jesus gave everything for us. Everything. Let's stand for prayer. Father, we thank you today for the faithful members of Bethel Holly Baptist Church. Those who've gone before us, those who kept this church alive when it seemed like it was going to die. Those who kept praying, those who kept teaching, those who kept encouraging, those who kept witnessing. Father, we're so grateful for them. So grateful for the generation after generation who continue to serve here in this community. Even after the town died, even after the other church died, even after people began to move away, they were faithful to your church. And as a result, we stand on the foundation that they've built for us today. And now it's our turn. The baton is in our hands. May you and may the others behind us find us faithful. May we be committed to serve you, not letting anything keep us from being faithful to your church. Father, help us to grow in our faith, commitment to you, commitment to your church, and help us to be known in our community as a believer, a follower of Jesus. I pray this morning that if there's someone here who does not know Jesus as their Savior, that today they'd come forward and say, I want Jesus in my heart, in my life. I pray that if there's a Christian here who recognizes that they need to recommit themselves so that they can start off today being faithful for the next 125 years or however long you give them, may they come today. May we be committed to you. Thank you for speaking to our hearts, and may we respond according to your will. For it's in Christ's name I pray. Our hymn of invitation is number 294. 294. As we sing, I'll be here in the front. If you have a decision